Welcome to this explainer. Think about the irony here for a second. Have you ever wondered if a peace treaty, a document literally designed from top to bottom to stop people from fighting, could actually be the very spark that ignites a powder keg? Well, today we're diving into the incredibly fascinating and frankly often tragic world of 18th century North American geopolitics. And our main goal today is to break down these core concepts simply. We're going to strip away all that dense historical jargon and uncover the real human stories and massive misunderstandings that literally shaped a continent.
I know, it sounds like a total paradox, doesn't it? But this is exactly what happened in 1713. You have these European powers sitting down, drawing arbitrary lines on a map, and agreeing to stop fighting each other. But their so-called peace agreement basically acted like a match dropped straight into a powder keg. It ignited a brutal, sprawling conflict with the indigenous nations who actually lived on that land. This central paradox is really what sets up the core concepts of our whole story today.
So, here's our roadmap. We're going to hit the illusion of peace, the Treaty of Portsmouth, allies versus subjects, broken promises and war, and finally, a modern mission. Let's jump right into it.
Part 1. The Illusion of Peace, the Treaty of Utrecht. Picture it, it's 1713. After years of exhausting conflict, Britain and France finally signed the Treaty of Utrecht. It was also known as the Treaty of Peace and Friendship, and it basically allowed these two European heavyweights to stop fighting and swap some highly valuable land in North America. France handed over territories to the British, and, on paper, it looked like a neat, tidy resolution.
But wait, there was a massive, glaring omission here. The First Nations peoples who actually lived on, relied on, and controlled that land were left completely out of the process. So when the British started settling in these former French territories, the Wabanaki people demanded to know, by what right are you even here? The answer they got, that the King of France had simply handed their country over to the King of England, caused absolute shock. As a Jesuit missionary living among the Wabanaki recorded back in 1722, they were thrown into the greatest alarm. They flat out refused to patiently endure being treated as property that could just be casually transferred from one European monarch to another.
Part 2. The Treaty of Portsmouth, an attempt at agreement. To expand their territory and bring some stability, the British realized that they really needed to sever the alliance between the French and the Wabanaki Confederacy. So in July 1713, they tried to take control of the situation by negotiating directly with the Wabanaki on the eastern coast. And this results in the Treaty of Portsmouth.
It is honestly so fascinating to see the actual document from 1713. You can literally see the animal marks representing the Wabanaki leaders right there alongside the British signatures. It really grounds the history and reminds us that real people sat down and hashed this out. The British promised not to build any further on Wabanaki land, to conduct trade at neutral locations, and to exchange gifts following Wabanaki tradition. In return for all that, the Wabanaki agreed to stop attacking the British, return taken lands, and actually let future disputes be decided by the British government.
But seriously, just think about the sheer irony of this setup for a second. You've got this incredibly complex legal document binding the future of entire nations, and it is written entirely in English. It was literally just read aloud to the Wabanaki members by interpreters. Just imagine the massive potential for miscommunication there. How do you accurately translate complex legal and, let's face it, geopolitical concepts across completely different languages and worldviews right on the spot? Well, as we'll see, you often just can't.
Part 3. Allies versus subjects, a clash of definitions. This right here brings us to the absolute core of this explainer. This impending war wasn't just about land. It boiled down to how two incredibly simple concepts were understood in completely different ways. To truly get this conflict, we need to break these core concepts down simply. Let's start by defining the word subject, meaning a person or nation under the rule of another. So the crucial takeaway is how the British viewed the Wabanaki. The British logic went like this. The Wabanaki had fought alongside the French. Therefore, the Wabanaki were subjects of the French king. Because they were subjects, they were bound by the Treaty of Utrecht. And since France gave up the land in that treaty, boom, the Wabanaki had inherently lost their right to their own land.
Now completely flip that and look at an alliance, which is an agreement between people or groups to achieve a common goal. The French Governor-General, Vaudreuil, publicly stated that the French treated the First Nations as allies, definitely not as subjects. He even gave out payments to encourage them to settle in New France. By defining them as allies, Vaudreuil was basically declaring that the Wabanaki Confederacy was a separate, sovereign nation. Therefore, their land was never the French king's to give away in the Treaty of Utrecht in the first place, a clever stance that conveniently also allowed the French to keep a foothold in the region.
And this just brilliantly illustrates the geopolitical trap they were all caught in. On one side, you have the British, operating on the firm assumption that they now owned the land and held total authority over the people on it. And on the other side, the French and the Wabanaki were operating on the reality that the Wabanaki were an independent, sovereign nation actively holding onto their traditional unceded territory. I mean, it was a ticking time bomb.
Part 4. Broken promises and war escalation. Because as we all know, peace on paper rarely translates to peace on the ground when the core understanding between everyone is completely fractured. Almost immediately after the Treaty of Portsmouth was signed, the promises just started falling apart. Things unraveled fast. The British quickly broke the treaty's terms by stationing soldiers and building settlements right inside Wabanaki territory. So, in response to this obvious encroachment, the Wabanaki retaliated by attacking a newly built British fishing station. And for the next 10 years, this vicious cycle of raids and retaliations plagued the eastern coast and New England. Now, while the French officially denied any involvement, letters later proved French officials were secretly promising munitions to the Wabanaki. Father Sebastian Rale, a French Jesuit priest who lived with the Wabanaki, even accompanied them on raids. Ultimately, this all boiled over into what became known as Father Raleigh's War, which lasted from 1722 to 1725.
This 1856 painting depicts the incredibly dramatic 1724 death of Father Raleigh, who was captured and killed by the British. While yes, it's a later artistic interpretation, it really grounds the bloody reality of these abstract treaty failures. This wasn't just some academic disagreement over translation, it resulted in burned villages, decades of violence, and a truly immense loss of life.
Part 5. A Modern Mission. Idle no more. So, you might be sitting there thinking, okay, that's fascinating history, but why does any of this matter to us today? Well, let's fast forward 300 years. The reverberations of these exact same misunderstandings regarding land, sovereignty, and what it really means to be an ally versus a subject, they are still incredibly active today, and they are actively shaping modern Indigenous rights movements.
Enter David Kawapet. Back in January 2013, this 18-year-old Cree youth embarked on an absolutely incredible mission. Supporting the Idle No More movement, he and 6 others, who became known as the Nishiyu Walkers, trekked over 1,500 kilometers from northern Quebec all the way to Parliament Hill in Ottawa, following traditional trading routes. Just to put that astonishing physical feat into perspective, that is 2 full months of walking in the freezing, brutal Canadian winter. They walked to demand fair and equal treatment of First Nations peoples from the Canadian government.
By the way, that same year just happened to mark the 300th anniversary of the Treaty of Portsmouth. Charles B. Deliac, who was the chairman of that anniversary, pointed out something really profound. He noted that the very issues discussed way back in 1713, like who actually has the right to the land and how distinct nations should interact with governments, have a direct connection to the Indigenous rights headlines that we read today. The core historical struggle has just never entirely vanished.
So what actually inspired David Kawapet to make that grueling journey? Well, it was a really powerful vision he had. He envisioned a bear, representing the massive power of the government, and a wolf, representing First Nations peoples. And the message was clear. While a massive bear can easily defeat a single lone wolf, a pack of wolves banded together can absolutely take down the bear.
This simple metaphor perfectly breaks down the modern concept of collective power. Kawapet wasn't walking to start a war. He was walking to unite people. By banding together, he and the thousands of people who welcomed him in Ottawa demonstrated their belief that strength and unity can protect traditional lands for future generations and force a real, national conversation on equality. It essentially reflects the exact same demand for respect as a sovereign ally that the Wabanaki sought 3 centuries ago.
So, from the Treaty of Utrecht all those centuries ago to the steps of Parliament Hill today, the story of North America is deeply, deeply tied to how we choose to view one another. And so I want to leave you with this to think about. As we look at the social and political landscapes of today, 300 years after those confusing, translated promises in Portsmouth, have we finally learned the difference between ruling a subject and truly respecting an ally?